Hey guys, tonight we begin with something oddly soothing, enigmas, or more precisely, the cryptic ceremonies and obscured wisdom of the ancient Minoans, which turn out to be far more labyrinthine and ethereal than most of us could envision. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to see who's joining us from across the globe. Now dim the lights, perhaps put on some gentle white noise, and let's drift into tonight's tale together. Before palaces were ruins and bull leaping was folklore, the ancient Minoans navigated their island world with a tapestry of secrets that would puzzle today's rational minds. It was called Thalassocratic harmony, a daily rhythm woven with portents and incantations, split as neatly as the tides turn during solstice. The routine was straightforward. Upon waking, most Minoans whispered prayers to the deities, invoking protection against the unseen forces that lurked in volcanic caves. Then, throughout the day, they'd pause for what can only be described as prophetic safeguards. This wasn't seen as paranoia, it was just how life flowed. The watchful hours between tasks were viewed as essential, practical, and sometimes delightfully communal. People used this time to consult frescoes, sprinkle protective olives, or check their labrous axes, because nothing disrupts your day like wondering if a sea spirit is eyeing your galley. And yes, this was also prime time for kinship rituals. Minoan priestesses and household artisans noted that the mind was clear and attuned during these moments, which sounds like a subtle way of saying too relaxed to question the gods. So if you ever thought you were thoughtful for avoiding seismic omens, just know your ancestors were setting the bar with snake goddesses and sacred horns. The evening would follow this interlude, winding down until starlight. Everyone from kings to farmers embraced this mystical cadence. Even epic tales like those in Linear A scripts casually referenced it. Which means that yes, even in ancient tablets, people were noting the importance of warding off underworld tremors. Curiously, modern anthropology suggests these enigmas might align with natural human instincts for pattern seeking. The ritual cycle matches how our brains process uncertainty without modern science. So the next time you knock on wood at midnight, don't fret, just murmur, "Ah yes, the ward has begun," and go polish a symbolic riton. It wasn't until later eras, with Mycenaean conquests, Hellenic lamps, and the rise of skepticism, that humans began to enforce the idea of logic over lore, as though beliefs were a timed debate. In the ancient Cretan world, encountering a portent midday wasn't a flaw, it was the norm, and everyone followed it whether they understood it or not. Let's talk about dwellings, or rather the Minoan version of them. In our era, we fuss over smart homes, ergonomic furniture, and ambient lighting. In ancient Knossos and Phaistos, a home was often a multi-story palace of gypsum and stone, stuffed with charms that once warded off chthonic beings, now faded under the ashes of time and unspoken fears. The typical commoner abode featured reed mats known as sleeping platforms. This was literally rushes or wool bundled into a low frame if they had the means for one. If not, it was just mats on the floor, possibly salty, possibly shared with a sacred animal. These platforms weren't luxurious, but they beat the alternative of quake-riddled cliffs. Reeds were abundant, insulating, and good at absorbing sea moisture. They were also prime spots for hiding protective figurines, faience beads, and the occasional wandering beetle, which turned resting into a lesson in cautious repose. If it rustled, you ignored it. If it pinched, you shifted gently and hoped for divine favor. If a family had more resources, or at least a sturdy roof, they might elevate the mat onto a wooden base. This didn't transform the experience much, but it did lower the odds of waking to a scorpion in your sandal slightly.
Linens were a common comfort. Most slept in light tunics worn all day. Nightgowns weren't invented, and neither was solitude. Entire families, kids, parents, perhaps an elder, all slumbered together in the same room, sometimes on the same mat pile. If you overheated, you could always nudge into your sibling's space. Nobles naturally had grander setups, elaborate beds with headrests, woven blankets, and canopies to block drafts and hopefully evil eyes. These beds were so prized they were buried with owners. You didn't inherit gold, you inherited Aunt Potnia's curiously carved wooden rest. Still, for most Minoans, a home wasn't for ease, it was a fortress against the abyss, to evade Tusamis, and maybe, just maybe, to envision being exalted enough to sleep without whispering wards against the god of earthquakes. When we say lucky charm today, we think of a cereal or a horseshoe keychain, maybe something whimsical with a grin and a questionable backstory. But in ancient Minoan Crete, a charm wasn't trivial. It was an amulet, a tangible, often elaborate piece of faience or gold meant to shield your soul from dissolution in the afterlife while you navigated daily perils. You see, protection wasn't the forte of Minoan architecture. Stone walls, frescoed halls, and doorways of wood didn't stand much against eruptions, and divine favor, that was called a dove. So to guard their essence, especially since spirits escaped quickest through dreams, Minoans embraced the humble amulet. These charms varied in forms and sizes, but the iconic double axe was labrys-shaped, symbolizing authority like the goddess Dictenia. They were typically crafted from gold, ivory, or whatever shard of magic could be spared without offending the sea gods. For men, it was a vital tool. For women, it often doubled as jewelry, which also served to uphold modesty and conceal hair that hadn't seen a ritual bath since the last taurocatapsis. But beyond safeguarding, amulets carried cultural heft. In some palaces, the snake ward was expected on everyone at all times, yes, even in repose. And the piece could be inscribed or colored to show a lineage's status or piety, because nothing declares prosperity like retiring with a mini-deity on your chest. In Uban hubs, the amulet even signified being at ease. If you greeted someone wearing one visibly, it was a polite Minoan nod of "I'm protected" from the Minotaur, and yes, this bauble does imply peace. Of course, amulets were paired with kilts, essentially loose garments. Picture a Minoan's acrobat minus the dramatic quest. Attire wasn't ornate, but it was functional, airy, and occasionally blessed. Today, sharing a meal with strangers is mostly for conferences, awkward dates, or that rare hostile mishap. But in ancient Minoan Crete, this was utterly routine and far from elective. Let's say you're a traveling merchant, a pilgrim, or just someone whose trireme stalled halfway to Akrotiri. You seek a villa, a modest stone structure at best, and request lodging. What you receive isn't privacy, or a cot, or even a swept floor. What you get is a spot on a mat already occupied. Minoan compounds functioned like communal havens rather than solitary retreats. Seclusion wasn't anticipated. If the mat had room, you shared it, often with utter unknowns who might whisper dreams, invoke gods, or harbor mysterious seals. This wasn't impolite, it was resourceful. Mats could accommodate 2, 3, even 4 wayfarers based on size and tolerance. In larger palaces, you might land in a courtyard space with rows of mats and 0 boundaries. Invocation contests went unspoken. Elbow claims were subtly negotiated. Sometimes genders separated, but not invariably. Some villas grouped by trade, artisans with artisans, priestesses with priestesses, merchants with fellow hagglers allegedly. But frequently it was first arrived, first sprawled. And while this might horrify modern isolationists, then it trumped sleeping under stars with griffins, Tusamis, or occasional pirate raids. Concerned about theft? Many travelers slept with pouches tied to belts or hidden in folds. Others rested atop bundles, making luggage both cushion and sentinel. If someone shifted your sack, it often meant awakening lighter. The elite, of course, avoided this. Kings journeyed with attendants and camped luxuriously, or demanded sole spaces if the host valued their favor. In the Minoan realm, retiring wasn't merely drawing a curtain and fading, it was a divine endeavor, a nightly wager where the prize was your eternal psyche. People didn't just rest, they readied for potential judgment. Hence the ubiquity of evening invocations. Forget aromatherapy or soothing apps. Minoan sleepers unwound with offerings, chants, and soul-purifying hymns just in case they crossed to the underworld between dusk and dawn.
The notion was plain. You could depart at any instant from ailment, curse, deities, or most perilously, being past 30 in the Bronze Age. So you'd better intone your rites, not for solace, but because the abyss was daunting, and you didn't want to arrive unprepared, unanointed, and spiritually unkempt. One prevalent verse, "If I should pass before dawn, I beseech the great goddess my soul to claim." Charming, yes, except it's essentially a child's plea acknowledging demise as a likely nocturnal event. Many adults possessed a repertoire of chants for varied threats, one for guilt, one for suspecting the chthonic in the shadows, one for quake aversion, which sadly proved ineffective. Some even beseeched specific deities famed for guarding dreamers, like celestial wardens at the soul's gate. The truly pious Wanax, Loagetas, and anxious nobles concluded days with Vespers, the final rite before silence. After Vespers, they observed quietude, which wasn't challenging as all were fatigued, undernourished, and mildly wary of night. Children, too, were urged to chant, partly for their essence, partly to occupy them beyond querying why the dove was on their mat again. Parents noted that gods watched, which seems endearing until realizing it's less protector and more divine oversight. In essence, pre-sleep rites were less about tranquility and more about 11th hour safeguarding. View it as ancient warding spells. You trusted they functioned, even if the mechanics eluded you. In contemporary times, visions are often brushed off as subconscious gibberish, anxiety, excess wine, or your mind sorting chaos in obscurity. But in ancient Minoan Crete, dreams were regarded gravely, as in cosmic implications grave. Dreams weren't mere dreams. They were deemed missives from gods, ancestors, the chthonic, your thymos, or possibly that odd fresco you touched last festival. Some were prophetic revelations, others infernal lures. Regardless, you were expected to heed and perhaps record or confess for days to be secure. Priestesses, scribes, and self-styled seers devoted surprising time to deciphering dreams. Whole linear A tablets were devoted to interpretations. Dreamed of fire? Might be chaos. Water? Renewal or inundation. Dreamed of a bull-headed dancer? Summon a palace expert promptly and perhaps relocate. Minoans held that what transpired in dreams counted because your soul roamed while you slumbered. This implied dream deeds could expose concealed transgressions or spiritual flaws. That awkward dream about pilfering olives? Perhaps your inner self admitting worldly greed, or just famine. But confess anyway, to err safe. Palace folk often noted dreams and shared with superiors. Some were lauded for sacred visions in sleep. Others advised to avoid grapes pre-bed. Naturally, dreams weren't solely mystical enigmas, they fueled narratives too. Minoan lore brims with dream sequences where heroes meet deities, demons, or allegorical beasts reciting wisdom. Dreams were essentially the frescoed saga, but with more symbolism and fewer resolutions. The palaces, predictably, were cautious. Not all dreams were holy, and some were thought sown by chaos gods to corrupt the pure. If you envisioned something impure, it might mean your essence was besieged, or you dozed too near volcanic fumes again. In today's world, some let pets in bed. It's snug, if sometimes odorous. In ancient Minoan Crete, sharing with animals wasn't quirky, it was a spiritual tactic. Let's begin with fundamentals.
Minoan homes weren't comfort-built. Stone and gypsum, no seals, drafts fierce as Aegean winds. Sacred warmth? That was the family goat. In humble villas, humans and beasts often cohabited the same space, sometimes the same mat, and frequently the same reed bundle. Geese roamed, dogs nestled at feet, doves cooed by the hearth, and if fortunate, none scratched during night. This wasn't affection, though Minoans revered animals. It was harmony. Beasts embodied gods, bulls the earth-shaker, doves the mistress of animals. They were divine, reliable, and unlike kin, didn't claim the best spot. A dog could ward spirits. A snake in the corner might elevate sanctity by a notch, which in storm season felt miraculous. Minoan homes, especially modest ones, often had one room for all. Cooking, dining, resting, occasionally rites. Kids might nestle between parents and a sacred bull calf. A goose could alarm at dawn. Hygiene? Best not probe. For affluent families, this lessened. Nobles didn't typically slumber near livestock, though they might have favored doves abed. Not for divinity, but for prestige and pest control. Some palaces had separate quarters for holy animals, because nothing says authority like a dove with its own shrine and title. Drawbacks existed, of course. Beasts can be noisy, they wander, and historically they're not famed for boundaries. But Minoans adapted. A beak poke at midnight? Just bedtime norm. If you've shared a palace and thought this is excessive, meet the ancient Minoan shrine dormitory, where Ease went to meditate under vows of eternity. Shrines shunned personal space, or luxury, or frivolity, really. The standard dormitory housed dozens of priestesses in one vast hall, arranged neatly like devout sentinels. Beds, if termed so, were stone slabs, sometimes with reed mats, if the high priestess felt benevolent or it was a holy day. You slept robed, not for decorum, but dressing in dark for dawn rites was more arduous than bedding prepared. The priestly garb, including bodice, skirt, and sandals, served as spiritual shield and meager warmth. If chilled, you layered. If warm, well, no, you endured. No cushions, no dividers, and no chatter. Silence was mandated, not optional, under the Potnia's rule. If you shifted and sighed too audibly, you might draw purification duty for a week. Cooing doves, however, were tolerated. You couldn't control them, but if disruptive, the gods might note, or at least your sisters would. Illumination was sparse. One lamp, perhaps. You didn't need sight. You needed stillness and purity. That was the aim. Despite austerity, priestesses believed sparse beds prepared for eternity. Denying flesh honed the soul. Rest wasn't delight. It was duty, scheduled like offerings. Some priestesses even slumbered upright to shun indulgence, or visions, or ease. Compared to this, commoners' reed piles and cooing doves seem opulent. At least the dove didn't judge. Let's discuss something that would appall modern resters. Rising willingly at midnight, not for relief or scroll, but for ritual. Chanting, chilled, torchlit ritual. In Minoan shrines, this was standard. Priestesses followed strict schedules based on lunar hours, including dawn service. And by dawn, we mean deepest night, when even stars pondered awakening. The horn would sound, often blown by the unlucky, and the hall of robed, rest-deprived souls would file to the lustral basin in hush, and yes, still garbed, because priestesses shunned nightwear. The only system they trusted was divine. In the sanctuary, by flickering torch, amid stone echoes, they'd chant hymns, offer libations, and strive not to doze standing, which was genuine concern. Frescoes suggest priestesses disciplined for nodding mid-rite, usually with extra duties or chants. Dozed in dawn rite, now lead the next. Services could span hours. Zealous orders extended to 3. Imagine maintaining devotion while your belly recalls dinner was figs and a lesson, and your form fades. After, priestesses might return for second rest, or, in strict sanctuaries, proceed to study or labor, because nothing declares piety like painting frescoes on fragmented repose. Why so early? To dedicate night's purest part to gods, undisturbed by daylight's lures, waves, or cycles. It symbolized devotion. or at least once you overcame numbed toes, smoke, and the off-key hymn from Sister Ariadne. In our time, resting solo is often luxury, signifying independence, peace, or blanket control. In ancient Minoan Crete, solo slumber was dubious, impractical, or outright hazardous. Let's start with basics. Warmth. Homes, as noted, weren't toasty. Stone walls and open vents trapped little heat, and sacred fire was centuries off. So people shared mats for essence heat, not closeness, but basic thermal need. Children with kin, parents, sometimes the visitor's child if present. It resembled a gathering, but uninvited. But beyond warmth, there was mystical motive for group rest. Many believed night was when the chthonic stirred. Alone in dark, your thymos might be vulnerable to temptation or worse, unrest. Others nearby formed a moral shield. If amiss, at least witnesses or first to thwart the entity. For young, solo night was inconceivable, not just comfort, but because spirits, deities, and wandering essences filled nocturnal tales. Stories warned against lone rest as a portal to mischief and peril. And unlike modern tales, these ended in vanishings. Even couples often shared with offspring, servants, or guests. Privacy was myth. In fact, two alone on a vast mat would seem wasteful or profoundly suspect.
In shrine contexts, priestesses slumbered communally. Solo assignment was often penalty. Yes, sometimes lone mat was literal chastisement. Minoan logic. Solitary grants sin chance. Group, accountability. Next time you're alone in bed with your blanket in a room sans beast scent, savor quiet. In Minoan lands, you'd likely have 2 kids, a sacred dove, and a cousin, all cooing. If you've napped upright in a meeting, cart, or waiting hall, you likely awoke with neck ache and regret. But in ancient Minoan Crete, upright rest wasn't mishap, it was choice. Some Minoans, especially elite or devout, opted propped over flat. Why? Reasons none restful. First, belief lying flat harmed digestion, breath, or life force balance. In a world where healers thought a cough could displace your thymos, this seemed sound. Upright aided avoiding brain congestion, ominous but meaning don't choke on humors. Second, spiritual worries. Flat mimicked death pose. You avoided confusing gods or attracting the earth shaker by resting funeral style. Superstitious? Utterly. But when your priestess was also healer, you chose battles wisely. Thus, people often rested reclined, bolstered by pillows, headrests, or carved supports like Minoan easy chairs. Nobles had beds with angled props for semi-seated, ideal for processing evening wine or repelling surprise entities. Priestesses advanced it. In strict orders, they might sit on benches or lean walls with naught but headdresses for comfort. It wasn't health, it was piety. Too comfy? Might dream. Dream? Might err. Err? Welcome to dawn confession. Needless, this wasn't quality rest. It was virtue, unease, and puzzling theology. Forget spectral visions or entities under mat. For Minoans, true night terrors were already in fabrics, small, tenacious, and indifferent to chance. We're speaking, of course, about flies, lice, and the Minoan bedroom's emblem, the island flea. Let's not gloss. Hygiene wasn't Minoan Crete's forte. Baths were ritual, laundry rare, and soap from ashes better unnamed. Add reed mats, shared linens, and occasional holy bird, and you've pest paradise. Fleas and lice were ubiquitous as roommates. Commoners battled daily. Nobles, despite frescoes and canopies, weren't immune. Some households had dedicated groomers, servants removing nits from masters' flounces and garb. Imagine that title, Keeper of the Royal Flounce. Island fleas were silent stalkers. They hid in bed frames, mat seams, even wall cracks, emerging nocturnal to feast like tiny demons.
If wondered why Minoans wore headrests and full attire abed, it wasn't always warmth, sometimes pest armor. Remedies ranged effective to wild. Some burned herbs like thyme or olive to repel. Others slept with garlic, onions, or ashes abed, which might little for pests but curbed intimacy. It wasn't mere itch. Pests symbolized impurity or divine disfavor, biting reminders of chaos and poor choices. Poems existed on flies, some moral, some oddly poetic, as nothing says devotion like "unite us as the flea that plagues us both." So while modern rest disrupts by alerts and lights, Minoan was likely interrupted by scratching, twitching, and subtle shin crawl, because it was. We've had sleepless nights, but ever tried dozing in 50 pounds of linen? No? Well, in ancient Minoan Crete, some did precisely that, because nothing says serene dreams like being ready for ritual at rest. Now, to clarify, most, even priestesses, didn't routinely sleep in full regalia. It was hot, heavy, and cumbersome, turning in layers like trying nap in a wave crest. But during festivals or in sacred sites, sleeping partially adorned was safer, comfort optional, piety recommended. A night in shrine might remove only headdress and jewels, keeping bodice or skirt on lest gods call midnight. Nothing like awaking to lunar hymns and needing attire while half dreaming of labyrinths. In sacred precincts, attendants might sleep with staves or symbols aside, like fervent security talismans. Amulets doubled pillows, and if alarm sounded, at least no dressing. Priorities. Of course, full garb wasn't restorative, linen isn't breathable, and beads pinch. Add stone floors, minimal padding, and ambient chants and torches, and you've rest environment ranking below caldera on comfort. Even non-ritual folk sometimes wore light protective items in uncertain areas. Traveling acrobats or sailors might doze in anointed cloths offering slight safeguard and more padding than prayer alone. And garb wasn't subtle. Shift wrong, you might rustle so loud all awoke assuming the cataclysm arrived. In a time when nightly entities, pest swarms, and doves abed weren't odd, you'd think somnambulism was mere quirk. But no, it was dramatic. In Minoan Crete, if you wandered asleep, people didn't attribute to fatigue or moon. They assumed possession, curse, or unfinished rite with the pantheon.
Sleepwalking, or nocturnal wandering, if impressing the artisan, was misunderstood and feared. Ideas someone could rise from mat, shuffle room, stare at fresco was less harmless and more chthonic rehearsal. Accounts suggest genuine spook from sleepwalkers. Imagine figure in flounce, lamp in hand, eyes vacant, muttering syllables unknown while stepping over beasts. You'd think apparition or heretic or both, and per local priestess, exorcism might schedule pre-dawn. Some believed caused by imbalanced life force, especially excess bile, Minoan catch-all for inexplicables. Others thought phymos temporarily freed, leaving body to amble like an unattended goat. To prevent, they tried herbs to chants, hanging charms, or rural, tying leg to post. Extreme? Consider homes had open hearths, blades everywhere, and pots waiting overturn. In a curious note, rumors of palace climbing asleep. Whether exaggerated, fear of leaping dreamers led to latticed windows and debates if one could sin unconscious. Thankfully, most just paced, muttered, or tried imaginary gates. But if sleepwalked to a shrine, locals might see divine sign or call cleansing to cover bases. If Minoan life taught anything, it was resting through tumult. Shrine horns, storms, bleating beasts, occasional raid. For the sea-shrouded weary, these were ambient, Minoan white noise. start with horns. Shrine signals marked sacred moments, dawn, rites, meals, and midnight vigils at 2 or 3 a.m. If near palace, dreams soundtracked by blasts. Brain adapted. Horns became lullaby for overscheduled soul. Not just horns, storms frequent, terrifying, no forecasts or sealed doors, every thunder like world end. Roofs leaked, lattices rattled, winds howled like griffins. Still, people rested. They must. Labor didn't pause for wakefulness, nor did trading, chanting, or evading Mycenaeans. Speaking which, invasions and cataclysms weren't always rest breakers. In eras, people slumbered through drought, war, even eruptions. When galleys rolled morn, it was grim alarm over panic. And if not awake, some saw mercy. Artifacts show resting through quakes, fires, and mobs. Deprivation common, bodies adjusted. If toiled dawn to dusk, ate barely, spent days dodging waves, taxes, divine wrath, you'd crash hard. Then some used rest as escape, faced illness, loss, or world end, forecast often. Some curled under cloak, murmured right, napped. Strange wisdom there. In the ashes of 1628 BCE, the island of Crete was wrapped in more than just mist. It was enveloped in prosperity, routine, and a subtle unease that seeped into the palaces and sacred peaks. The people of Crete were Minoans, seafaring, devout, and deeply tied to their volcanic soil. They believed they were thriving in a maritime empire watched by gods and favored by trade. Life was vibrant. The palaces had expanded from earlier settlements. Markets thrived with ivory, saffron, and pottery. Acrobats leaped in the courts. Shrines to the great goddess and earth-shaker stood proud. Add to this the balmy Aegean season, and something was bound to erupt. That eruption came from Thera, long thought dormant. Minor tremors had shaken the ground for years, but locals dismissed them as normal. Wells fluctuated, animals grew restless, but daily life continued. Artisans painted frescoes, merchants haggled, children played in courtyards. On a fateful day around 1628 BCE, the volcano roared to life. A massive plume of ash and pumice shot miles into the sky. For the Minoans, it was the beginning of the end. Ash rained down, blanketing roofs and choking air. Some fled immediately, grabbing valuables and heading to the seas. Others sheltered indoors, hoping it would pass. By the aftermath, the islands were buried under debris. Tsunamis and climate shifts would soon seal their fate. Crete was a thalassocratic power of thousands, a mix of kings, priestesses, and traders. What was about to happen would preserve their mysteries in pumice, a snapshot of Minoan elegance, frozen forever. What began as rumbles in the earth would soon become screams in the dark, and a legacy of enigma that still captivates the world. Once Thera awoke, its fury spread like wildfire, silent at first, then devastating everything. The initial phase was pumice fall, light stones raining for days. Roofs groaned under weight, people huddled in halls, covering mouths with cloths. They lit lamps against the unnatural darkness, praying to island gods. The first victims were those caught outside, trampled in panic or suffocated by ash. But soon the horror escalated. Around the cataclysm, pyroclastic surges hit nearby islands, vaporizing everything in seconds. Temperatures reached infernal heights. Bodies were preserved, cultures shattered in the blast. And that's our journey through the cryptic world of the ancient Minoans tonight. If this whispered tale of enigmas and forgotten history resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop your thoughts below. Until next time, may your nights be warded and your dreams prophetic. Good night.